I would like to invite Dr. Nikhil. Please come on the dais. The consultant group of TB hospitals from Mumbai. I would also like to request Dr. Sandeep Katiyar. Please come on the dais. Professor S.K. Katiyar sir. Professor Sushil Chandra sir.
करिश्मा तुम गई नहीं स्टेज पे
I request Dr. Pin Katiyar sir to welcome Professor S.K. Katiyar sir.
Good afternoon, all of you. Let me first of all congratulate the organizers, especially Dr. Praveen Katiyar, for organizing this conference on a very important subject, cancer. Something which besides genetics and other things is man-made. Why I call it man-made? Because perhaps it is we who are responsible for creating a lot of cancer in patients. Whether it is use of nicotine in tobacco in any form, whether smoking or chewing tobacco or cigar or pipe or hookah or now e-cigarettes, anything that you use, you're using nicotine, which is very harmful to the body. The atmospheric pollution, another thing which is a man-made problem and is responsible for lots of cases of cancer. Food adulteration could be another reason. So it's a long list of causes which are perhaps man-made, which are responsible for this present epidemic, I must call it, epidemic of cancers in our country. And the most unfortunate thing is that the cases of cancer perhaps are developing very fast in the developing countries. And let me give you an example. That as far as lung cancer is concerned, 6 million people, that is 60 lakhs, are dying every year of lung cancer in the world. And if the things go unchecked, perhaps by the year 2030, 80 lakh people will be dying of lung cancer world over. And in the 21st century, it is likely that 1 billion people will die of lung cancer. And only one reason, and that is consumption of nicotine in form of tobacco used in any form. We are perhaps one of the highest consumers of tobacco in the world after China. We stand number 2 in the world, and this consumption is fast increasing. And we have today with us an eminent speaker from Mumbai, Dr. Nikhil Sarandhar, who has come all the way from Mumbai to talk to us. I'm very grateful to him for being here with us this afternoon. And he'll be talking on politics, government and cancer. What impact does the politics and government have in causation of cancer and in management of cancer too? Dr. Nikhil hails from Mumbai. He is a chest consultant in group of TB hospitals, Sewri, Mumbai. He is former Assistant Professor, Department of Tuberculosis and Chest Diseases, KG Somaiya Medical College, Mumbai. He has been organizing and scientific secretary of NAPCON 2016, the last conference, All India conference, which was held. And fortunately, I was the scientific chairman at that conference, and I called Dr. Nikhil as the dictionary for anything that you want. He is an encyclopedia of anything in the chest medicine. He'll be able to tell you. He has delivered several guest lectures, both at national and international conferences, and a recipient of several prestigious awards at national conferences. He is author of 18 chapters in textbooks and 9 articles in index journals. He is the governing council member of TV Association of India, National College Chess Association, and also the Indian Chess Society. I'm really thankful to Dr. Nikhil to be here with us for this conference, and he'll be speaking to you on politics, government, and cancer. Professor Sushil Chandra is my co-chairperson. He'd like to say a few words before this lecture started by Dr. Nikhil.
Dr. Katiyar, and thank you, Dr. Praveen Katiyar, for inviting me and chair this session. Recently, we thought that the court has given a verdict that right to privacy is a fundamental right. I wonder why the right to health is not a fundamental right. The government should take all the measures of health as some countries in abroad are taking for the health of their whole countrymen, especially against diseases like cancer. Now I will invite Dr. Speaker, Dr. Nikhil, to deliver his talk.
Thank you, respected chairpersons, for the very kind introduction. And at the outset, I am grateful to the organizers of the Fight Against Cancer Conference in Kanpur, especially Dr. Praveen Katiyar and other organizers for inviting me here, and also respected chairpersons for the very excellent introduction. My talk is on politics, government and cancer, something different for a medical person to be speaking about. I'll begin by paying a tribute to the departed soul of my late teacher, Emeritus Director Professor Dr. K.C. Mohanty, who passed away and left for his heavenly abode on 1st June this year. He was the doyen of chest disease and tuberculosis in India, and also called the Bhishma Pitama of respiratory medicine in the country. So I'll begin with a brief introduction. How many of you know this person? Of India, who is known as a man of integrity and has conducted mainly 2 difficult elections in 2002, those in Jammu and Kashmir and Gujarat, for which he was awarded the Raymond Magsaysay Award. He's frequently expressed his disdain for politics and politicians. Amongst his greatest quotes are that politicians are like a cancer which has no cure. And he's quoting. And then how many of you know this person? He's very famous. Excellent. This shows him when he was much younger. And this person? Excellent. So why am I showing these 2 people? What is common between both of them, apart from the fact that they were former Prime Ministers of India? Of course, they both hail from the state of UP. Both of them began their political careers in Congress party, but later on became leaders of the Janata Dal. One, that is VP Singh, came to power after toppling Rajiv Gandhi's government because of the Bofors scandal, and the other, Chandrasekhar, was himself toppled when Rajiv Gandhi withdrew support in 1991. But apart from that, both these people who became the topmost political leaders in our country and went on to attain the Prime Minister's office, even they suffered from cancer. Both of them had the same cancer, multiple myeloma, which is a disease of, which is a cancer of the bone. Both of them were receiving treatment from the same hospital in Delhi, from the same oncologist. Both of them succumbed to the disease within 1 year of each other. Chandrasekhar expired in 2007 and Shri VP Singh in 2008. So this is just to show that nobody is safe from cancer. It is a truly secular disease. It affects everyone, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, everybody. It spares no one. Even prime ministers, presidents, kings, queens and emperors, they can all suffer and even die from cancer. Let's take a few examples of world leaders who have been afflicted by it. Ronald Reagan of the United States, 1985, during his second term, he was diagnosed with cancer. He underwent 3 operations. He completed 2 years in office and expired in 2004. Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, elected president for 4 terms. During his presidency, Venezuela saw massive improvements in poverty, literacy, income equality and quality of life, but he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. This is a fatal form of cancer and he expired in 2013. Francois Mitterrand, the longest serving president of France for 14 years, he was also diagnosed with prostate cancer during his first term in 1981, but it was not revealed until 10 years later when he actually underwent operation for it. Václav Havel of the Czech Republic, he was a heavy smoker, was diagnosed with lung cancer, underwent surgery in his right lung. He expired in December 2011. Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, president of Brazil, he was also a chain smoker. He was diagnosed with cancer of the oropharynx, hospitalized during chemotherapy. He led his country to a period of robust economic growth in which more than 20 million Brazilians were lifted out of poverty. But he himself was found guilty of corruption and sentenced for 10 years. Fernando Lugo of Paraguay was also diagnosed in 2010 with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. He underwent chemotherapy and is now in remission. Prime Minister David Thompson of Barbados, very young person, 47 years old at that age, diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, which is often fatal. He received treatment in the United States, but he unfortunately expired a year later. The former king of Iran, Shah of Iran, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, during the time of the Islamic Revolution, when his government was overthrown, he was diagnosed with lymphoma in 1979. He sought refuge abroad and was treated in the United States, but he died during exile in Egypt in 1980. And the most important example of all, concerning our country, how cancer can impact politics and even change the geopolitical shape of a nation and even the continent. You know, he was the first founder and president of Pakistan. He proposed the infamous two-nation theory. Himself, he smoked 50 cigarettes a day, was diagnosed with tuberculosis twice, second time close to his death. He was detected to have an advanced form of lung cancer by his physician, Dr. Patel from Bombay in 1946, but this diagnosis was kept confidential. Because had it been revealed, probably the leaders of the Congress would have held on for some more time with negotiations and the partition could have possibly been averted. So, friends and colleagues, this is just to show how cancer can impact politics. And there are some more leaders afflicted by cancer. I am sure all of you know the person on the left, but I'll come to this slide later on as well. Some glimpses from history. Cancer is not something new. It has been there in the past. The work of Professor Rosalie David and Michael Zimmerman from the Villanova University of Pennsylvania in the United States. They analyzed fossils, literature, even mummies. Zimmerman was the first to diagnose rectal cancer in an Egyptian mummy 16 to 1800 years ago. They found evidence of cancer in animal fossils, non-human primates like monkeys and early humans, but they also found the incidence being very less. At best, after an extensive search for over 5,000 years, they could uncover only a few dozen cases of cancer. So they postulated that cancer was rare in antiquity, and one reason for this might have been that the short lifespan of individuals back then precluded development of the disease. And as they further analyzed ancient literature, they did not find description of treatment for cancer till the 17th century, mainly in the form of operations. They derived 3 conclusions. 1, in an ancient society lacking surgical intervention, evidence of cancer should have been there in all cases, but it was there in very few cases. Today, from few dozen, we have few million cases in the world today. So why has it suddenly shot up? They propose that factors predisposing to cancer are limited to societies afflicted by modern industrialization, and that cancer today is caused largely by man-made factors, namely diet, lifestyle, as Professor Dr. Katiyar said, smoking, nicotine consumption in any form, and of course, massive environmental pollution. The cancer incidence is rising. We have 14 million new cases and 8.2 million new deaths every year occurring exclusively because of cancer. Amongst the most commonly diagnosed cancers are those of lung, breast, and the colon, and the commonest cancer deaths are seen in lung, liver, and stomach cancers. It is projected that over 19 to 20 million new cancer cases will be there per year by the year 2025 due to growth and aging. The issue is not that. The issue is that more than half of all these new cases and over 2/3 of cancer-related deaths will be occurring in less developed regions of the world, and this proportion is expected to rise still further. So why is it rising? we've spoken about politics, I've spoken about cancer. Now I'll speak something little bit about government. In the past, in the olden age, we had something called monarchies, which were kingdoms governed by kings, queens and emperors. They had a council of ministers, mantri log jiske kehte hain. Royal lineage or dynastic succession was the sole criteria for accession to the throne. And if either the people selected a new leader, if they did not have one, or he used to win wars and annex other kingdoms. Today we don't have kingdoms, we have democratic republics or nation states which are governed by presidents and prime ministers, and still the cabinet ministers or council of ministers are there. ये मंत्री लोग कहाँ के कहाँ भी नहीं गए, वैसे के वैसे ही रहे. Today you have political parties or coalitions in power. They are elected through a system of democratic elections, but we know that we elect them, but who selects them to stand for election? So it is still partly selection in which dynasty and nepotism may have a role. The Industrial Revolution began during the same time as democratic republics or nation states began to replace monarchies during the 17th century. It heralded the beginning of a new scientific age. It did usher in the modern era, but it also unshackled the greed of man versus his need. Scientific, technical and industrial growth occurred on an exponential scale. Industry replaced agriculture. Man and his tools were replaced by machines which polluted the environment. Friends, there are two sides to every coin. You can't have development without disaster. The impact of the Industrial Revolution was that it created environmental pollution. Initially air and then water pollution also. You had smogs in London which were comprising of smoke from industrial chimneys mixing with the fogs. And these were found to be responsible for respiratory ailments. Retrospectively, when studied, it was found that a lot of these were responsible for cancers also. Rapid industrialization during the 20th century, combined with the effect of both world wars, accelerated the development of environmental pollution. Lung diseases, asthma, COPD, occupational lung disease, and cancers became more common. Prevalence of lung and heart diseases and cancer is 5 times more in the 20th century than in the 19th. Vehicle exhaust. 50 years ago, there was 1 car for every 1,000 people. Now there are more than 2 cars per person. So traffic pollution also counts. In India, the Industrial Revolution began with the British government which set up factories, mines and railways which ran on coal and oil. These polluted the environment. Post-independence, there was a policy of state-controlled enterprise which was expanding, and this relied on the establishment of heavy industry, and this also contributed to pollution significantly. Take for example the first 5-year plan. There was an outlay of 23% of national budget for agriculture. It oversaw the building of massive dams and irrigation projects like Bhakra Nangal. These, though beneficial in terms of increased long-term agricultural yield, had a significant ecological cost in terms of environmental modification and displacement of the population. Our first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru ji, was the chairman of the Planning Commission. He commissioned the Bhakra Nangal Dam in 1956, but 5 years later, himself he admitted that the human costs are unpayable. Our second 5-year plan laid emphasis on heavy industry as compared to agriculture, and it established several thermal power plants and steel, coal and cement factories. This created a robust public sector economic base in India. It paved the way for future industrialization of our country, but it also led to an unprecedented rise in pollution and related diseases, including cancer. So with growth and development, we had pollution, we had addiction, tobacco and to several other things. And we also have lifestyle diseases, or as they are called today, non-communicable diseases. Cancer is one and a very important one of them. Since the last 2 decades, our country has been one of the fastest expanding economies in the world. But as always, everything comes at a price. The cost of pollution and lifestyle diseases is going to be unaffordable in the near future, as the loss of precious man-hours, working days will not only lead to a decline in productivity and services, and thereby a drop in economic growth. Can anyone recognize this plant? It's a green leafy vegetable. Perhaps. Okay, I'll show it in another form. Now it is more easily recognizable, correct? This is tobacco. On the left you see bidis and on the right you see cigarettes. I am showing bidis first because that is more common in our country. Apart from smoked tobacco, you also have smokeless forms of tobacco which are more important, and I will show you in my future slides. You have gutka, you have pan masala, you have zarda and lots of other things. In the developing world, particularly in Southeast Asian region, 80% of tobacco deaths will be exclusively in the low-income countries by 2030. Most of the world's population, over 2/3, live in these countries and tobacco consumption is increasing. They represent a vast market in nations that are relatively lax on anti-tobacco laws and restrictions, and the epidemic will be most harmful for these people, to us, as we have fewer resources, medical, manpower, logistics, institutes, to deal with all consequences of tobacco use, including oral, lung and other cancers. The WHO has predicted that more than 1 billion people, 1/6 of the human race, will die from tobacco-related causes during this century. It's frightening that this epidemic is moving towards the poorer and least educated people. This addiction, if not checked, today will become the leading cause of death tomorrow. You can see here, this orange graph represents the developing countries. Tobacco will kill over 175 million people worldwide between now and the year 2030. It's a leading risk factor for 6 of the 8 leading causes of death in the world. In India itself, smoking kills 2 people every minute, 114 every hour, 2,740 every day, and more than 1.2 million every year. In our country, just smoking alone. 50% of these are illiterate and belong to the low socioeconomic status. If this is the burden of smoking, imagine what will happen if to the non-smokers, those who take smokeless tobacco. It is found that 53% Indians use tobacco products, out of which 2/3 are males and 40% are females. In our country, smokeless tobacco, that is gutka, the commonest form, over 48%, almost half of our population uses it. Smoked tobacco is used relatively less as compared to the West. Gutka, very important problem in the young people. Its use begins at a very young age. Since social customs don't permit children in India to buy or smoke cigarettes, Gutka becomes a method of choice because it has a sweet and flavory taste. It appeals to young children. It is easily available, it's not costly, and it is not visible to parents and elders who are supervising children. They can take it anytime. It's popular with poor children who can exhibit precancerous lesions at a very young age. Symptoms of cancer can appear in high school or college. In 2008, 5 million Indian children below the age of 15 were found to be addicted to gutka, and a survey in UP and MP found precursors of mouth cancers like oral submucous fibrosis in children. So you see, it is definitely a very, very important cause. We have spoken so much about cancer, about tobacco, about pollution. Let us come back to government and politics. What can government and political leaders do? Role of government, be it local, state, provincial, national, or even a union of nations, has clear roles in the control of cancer. Since a majority of research that has defined causes and treatment of cancer remains government funded, government also have a vital role in creating an environment that encourages individuals to adopt healthy behavior. Through regulation, education and support programs, government should work to create environments in which the consumption of tobacco is reduced and citizens maintain good levels of physical activity, healthy body weight and good nutrition. Cancer prevention and the promotion of a healthy culture is an essential mission of any elected government, which extends beyond traditional health ministries or departments. It also comes within the domain of environmental protection, transport and occupational safety. These also do have an impact. Cancer prevention, health promotion, all these also fall within realms not only of national or state authorities. They also fall within the jurisdiction of zonal authorities, health authorities and education authorities, even at state and district levels. Let's take few examples of how political leaders and governments throughout the world contributed immensely in the fight against cancer. We'll begin with the United States. President Richard Nixon in 1971 signed the National Cancer Act, which allocated $1.6 billion, quite a huge sum that time, to fight cancer. This was called beginning of the war of cancer. The aim was to eradicate cancer as a major cause of death by efforts to find a cure, by better research to improve understanding of cancer biology, to develop more effective cancer treatments, including targeted therapies. The act led to creation of a National Cancer Institute in the United States. It was held by philanthropists like the Lasker Foundation, which every year gives the Lasker Award. Funding was increased from 2.8 million in 1946 to 1.4 billion in 1972. Mary Lasker became the president of the Lasker Foundation after the death of her husband, Albert Lasker, in 1952, and her devotion to medical research and experience in the field of cancer eventually contributed to the passing of this National Cancer Act. Has it been beneficial? Yes, to a certain extent, as during the last 40 years, the number of cancer survivors in the United States, I am saying survivors, not deaths, it has increased to 12 million in 2007 as compared to 3 million in 1971 when the act was passed. Former President Obama During his election campaign in 2008, Senators Barack Obama and Joe Biden, who later on became the vice president, published a plan that entailed doubling federal funding for cancer research in 5 years and getting the United States Congress to increase funding for the Food and Drug Administration, along with additional funding for research on rare cancers and those without effective treatments, study of health disparities and evaluation of interventions, and efforts to better understand genetic factors that can impact cancer onset and outcomes. In 2009, President Obama released an economic stimulus package, including $10 billion for the National Institute of Health, which funds most of the cancer research in the United States. He also earmarked 20% of a research fund of $5 billion for research exclusively into targeted therapies and genetic causes of cancer. He also pledged to increase federal funding for cancer research by a third over the next 2 years to try and find a cure for cancer in our time. He also described emotionally his own mother's battle and a subsequent death with ovarian cancer, noting the additional funding his administration committed for cancer research. He declared, now is the time to commit ourselves to wage a war against cancer, as aggressive as it wages against us. Our former Prime Minister, Srimati Indira Gandhi ji, in her first 20-point program in 1976, 12 out of these 20 points can indirectly reduce the burden of cancer if implemented properly. The 20-point program was further modified by the UPA 30 years later, and here also if you see 13 out of these 20 points, if implemented, can indirectly reduce the burden of cancer in our country. So what can government and political leaders do? They can promote a clean and green India, promoting clean and eco-friendly industrial development. Under the UPA, environmental clearance became mandatory for setting up industries in 2008. UPA launched Bharat Nirman Abhiyan, which focused on strengthening rural infrastructure in 2005. Our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, has launched Swachh Bharat Abhiyan in 2014 and 15. So cleanliness and environmental protection has received definitely a booster shot in the arm. Governments can restrict consumption of tobacco and gutka. More than 50% of all cancers in our country are related to tobacco and gutka. Lung, oropharynx, larynx and esophageal cancers all attributed to consumption of gutka and tobacco. WHO has estimated that over 90% of oral cancers itself in Southeast Asia alone are attributable to tobacco directly. It's the leading cause of lung and oral cavity cancer in India, and in the majority of Indian patients it can definitely be prevented to a very large extent simply by avoiding intake of these things. Over 1 lakh new cases of oral cancer in India are diagnosed in India, and the problem is that 50% of them are in the advanced stage, where chances of survival are slim. We don't have awareness. Majority of these patients are very young, below the age of 35. What is disturbing that even children less than 12 years have started chewing tobacco. My state of Maharashtra was the first to ban gutka in 2002 and 2008, though these bans were subsequently overruled by Supreme Court, but it was successfully banned once again, gutka and smokeless tobacco in 2012. This time the ban was upheld. It was also the first state to ban pan masala. Important thing is that political leaders must practice what they preach. You see, Maharashtra's own political strongmen in power at the time, they were afflicted by oral cancer because both of them chewed tobacco. The one on the left, you all know him, he is Sharad Pawar, and the one on the right is R.R. Patil. Sharad Pawar, you all know him, I don't have to introduce him. He was CM of Maharashtra twice, the former Defence Minister of India. He is now President of the National Congress Party. He was diagnosed with oral cancer in 2005, underwent chemotherapy, radiotherapy as well as surgery. He has survived from cancer. Our Deputy CM and Home Minister of Maharashtra twice, Shri R.R. Patil, was not so lucky. He also had this habit of chewing gutka. He expired from oral cancer in 2015. So these two strong political leaders suffered from cancer. Their daughters, also politicians, have attempted to set right the legacy of their fathers. R.R. Patil's daughter, Srimati Smita Patil, who is an MLA, she has launched an anti-tobacco campaign in state colleges across the state to educate youth about the dangers of tobacco. While smoking is a big problem in urban colleges, chewing tobacco is more prevalent in rural colleges. She's also conducted awareness campaigns in more than 30 colleges to educate youngsters aged between 16 and 25 years about the harmful effects of chewing tobacco. And while conducting these programs, she also takes along doctors and counselors for the students. Apart from tobacco, the campaign also advises youngsters to stay away from alcohol. Sharad Pawar's daughter, Srimati Supriya Sule, who is a member of parliament in the Lok Sabha, she started a campaign against tobacco in our state after she saw the plight of her father. The campaign promotes advocacy, communication and social mobilization to empower addicts to kill the habit of tobacco and gutkha chewing. She also met our Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji and urged him to take up the issue of tobacco consumption in his next Mann Ki Baat address, and also to launch a campaign against the ill effects of tobacco along the lines of Swachh Bharat and Beti Bachao programs. Another positive example from the state of UP, Chief Minister Shri Yogi Adityanath ji saw this young Muslim boy of 25 years called Shadab, who was suffering from lymphoma, was in advanced stage. His family could not afford treatment. He ordered preparation of a file for referral to AIIMS Delhi, and within 3 days of CM's intervention, these formalities were completed. The best possible treatment was provided to him in Agra after that. So political leaders can set positive examples. They can play a role. Even if it is of one person, it does help. Our own Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi ji, during his Mann Ki Baat address, his most recent address on September 24th this year, he gave the example of a young boy called Bilal Dhar who works in Srinagar. He clears plastic, polythene and used bottles and any other form of waste from Asia's biggest lake. So cleaning up even rivers can contribute to a certain extent in the reduction of cancer. This boy's father had died of young cancer, and the Srinagar Municipal Corporation, instead of keeping any political leader, instead of keeping any celebrity or film star, they have kept Bilal Dhar as the brand ambassador for cleanliness for Kashmir. And Prime Minister Modi ji himself quoted, "I congratulate Bilal Dhar." This is important because it sets positive examples. He also, during his last Mann Ki Baat address in December last year, he said that during Mohan Malviya's birthday, I have laid the foundation stone for a cancer center in his name in my constituency called Varanasi. Governments can prohibit tobacco. The prohibition of advertisement and regulation of tobacco trade, commerce, production, supply and distribution act for cigarettes and other tobacco products was passed by government in 2003 and notified in the Gazette in 2004. It prohibits smoking in public places, direct and indirect advertisements of cigarettes and other products of tobacco, and their sale to persons below the age of 18. It mandates the depiction of statutory warnings on cigarette packs and also the tar and nicotine content along with maximal permissible limits. Let's take another example, a government officer. Shri Johnny Joseph, he was former Home Secretary of Maharashtra. Before that, he was the Chief Minister of the Municipal Corporation of Bombay. When this act curtailing smoking in public places was passed in 2008, at that time he was a chain smoker himself. My teacher, Dr. K.C. Mohanty, who was president of the Environmental Medical Association, whose slide I showed first, he met Shri Johnny Joseph and said, "Sir, you have to do something." He said, "I am a chain smoker myself, what can I do?" Then they had a half-hour discussion. And then at the end, Shri Johnny Joseph was convinced. He said, "Yes, I will try it." And from that day onwards, believe me, a chain smoker himself, he did not smoke a single cigarette. He himself gave up smoking in order to implement the ban, not only in letter but also in true spirit, and one of the examples of the leaders who said from the front. Our National Cancer Control Program was launched in 1975 and revised in 1984 and 2006. The objectives of primary prevention of cancers, mainly by health education regarding the hazards of tobacco consumption, and in females the necessity of genital hygiene for prevention of cervical cancer. Secondary prevention through early detection and diagnosis of cancers of the cervix, breast, and oropharynx by screening methods, and patient examination by self-care methods. The program also envisages support for strengthening of existing cancer treatment facilities, palliative care in terminal stage cancer, and scheme for financial assistance to voluntary organizations for undertaking health education and early detection activities of cancer. It was integrated with other programs for non-communicable diseases in 2011. The Ministry of Health integrated cancers, diabetes, cardiovascular disease and stroke in a single program called NPC-TCS. The components are to strengthen 100 districts in 21 states for cancer care services, to strengthen 65 centers as tertiary cancer care centers, to establish cells for program monitoring at selected states or districts, and overall to promote information, education and communication and create awareness about cancer and its available services. The 12th 5-year plan outlay had for this program sanctioned establishment for 20 state level cancer centers at a cost of 120 crores for each center, and the establishment of 50 tertiary care centers in different parts of the country at an allocation of 45 crores each in medical colleges, district hospitals or state government or NGO charitable institutions. There is also a district cancer control program. All this is government work. It was introduced in 1990 and modified 11 years later, the targets were to prevent large number of cancer cases simply by early case detection and health education in districts. Under this scheme, one-time financial assistance is provided to the concerned state government for each district project. This project is linked with a regional cancer center or an institution having facilities for treatment of cancer patients, and the patients are given treatment there. Our National Cancer Registry was commenced by the Indian Council of Medical Research in 1981. The objectives were to generate reliable data on the magnitude and patterns of cancer in India through the creation of population-based cancer registries, to undertake epidemiological studies based on this data, to assist in designing, planning, monitoring and evaluation of cancer control activities under the program, develop training programs in cancer epidemiology and research, and development of an Indian Cancer Atlas, which has already been developed. It is not enough to prevent, we must also treat. There have been large geographical gaps in cancer treatment in our country 10 to 15 years ago, and these have been largely corrected to a certain extent by government intervention. Government has given financial assistance as a one-time grant of 1 crore for charitable or NGO institutions and 1.5 crore for government institutions, exclusively for the procurement of radiotherapy equipment. Under this, 337 centers have been fully equipped with radiotherapy facilities, which include linear accelerators, telecobalt units, cyber knives, brachytherapy units, tomotherapy and gamma knife machines. But there is a large unmet need. According to WHO and the International Atomic Energy Agency norms, we require at least one radiotherapy machine per million population. We have only 0.41. That means more than 3/5 of our population is still bereft of a radiotherapy machine. And this shortage will rise in the future not only because our population will increase, but also the equipments which are currently used will become obsolete and may have to be dismantled. So we have to do a lot more. We need centers which can plan, conduct and coordinate cancer-related activities. We need to do more to understand, detect, diagnose and treat cancer, and to translate cancer knowledge, data and research to improve cancer care services and the quality of life of cancer patients or survivors. One of the attempts in this regard is the National Cancer Institute along the lines of the NCI in the United States. Government has allocated a budget of more than 2,000 crores for this, and it is to be set up in the campus of All India Institute of Medical Sciences at Jhajjar in Haryana. An area of 30 acres has been earmarked for the campus, and this will be a landmark in the arena of translational cancer research, particularly in the northern region of our country. And full capacity, this will employ more than 2,700 people, and it is expected to cater to more than 1 million patients per year. It will act as a nodal center for cancer research on the promotive, preventive and curative aspects of cancer care and human resource development. Already a memorandum of understanding has been signed with the Department of Biotechnology and the ICMR. The process of undersigning an MOU with the National Cancer in the United States has already begun. The objectives of this institute will be to provide affordable quality tertiary cancer care to cancer patients, act as the principal nodal agency of the country in the field of oncology, carry out innovative research and develop novel interventions to prevent and treat cancer, undertake clinical trials of new anti-cancer drugs as well as vaccines, carry out translational research and incorporate newly developed techniques in cancer therapy into clinical practice, and create international linkages with major cancer centers. This institute will have 16 clinical, 15 research divisions. It will also have translational disease management groups, apart from standard of care facilities. There are more than 700 beds for different faculties like medical, surgical and radiation oncology, anesthesia, palliative care and nuclear medicine. It will also have a tissue repository which will be the first of its kind in India. And this is how it is planned. You see this large OPD block is separate, hospital block is separate, and they have a separate block even for basic sciences for research. It will act as the principal institute for promoting, coordinating and conducting innovative research in cancer. It will establish a collaborative network internationally as well as with voluntary organizations. It will create and disseminate credible bases of cancer incidence, epidemiology, treatment, morbidity and mortality, and will translate this knowledge to evolve national cancer control qualities for the benefit of patients. It will also try and develop novel interventions to diagnose and treat cancer in India. Another center is the NCDIR, the National Center for Disease Informatics and Research in Bengaluru. It utilizes information technology for health research as an integral component. The objective is to sustain and develop a national research database on cancer, diabetes, CVD and stroke through recent advances in electronic and information technology, and a collaborative network to undertake etiological, epidemiological, clinical and control research. There are several regional cancer centers established by government, around 21 of them, and there are also 6 regional cancer centers which are run by NGOs or charitable institutions. Tata Memorial Center in Mumbai was one of the first of them, and they are distributed throughout the country from Dwarka to Dibrugarh and Srinagar to Kanyakumari. Initiatives taken by government. Government can have outreach activities in medical colleges for early detection and awareness of cancer. As Madam said previously, awareness is lacking. We need to create awareness. Training of personnel in early detection and awareness of cancer. Supply of morphine. Telemedicine and supply of computer hardware and software for teleservices. Information, education and communication activities. National Cancer Awareness Day has been launched on 7 November, which is the birthday of Mrs. Marie Curie, who was a Nobel Prize winner. She discovered radium along with her husband, Pierre Curie, but both of them also died of cancer. Training of cytopathologists and technicians in quality assurance, especially for Pap smear. Participation in health melas and distribution of educational material. A postage stamp depicting women carrying out cell breast examination has been brought out by the Departments of Posts and released on National Cancer Awareness Day. Health magazine Kalyani this year contains contains cancer and anti-tobacco items under the arrangement with Prasar Bharati and Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Broadcast of health education material through FM radio. Health Minister's Cancer Patient Fund has been set up under the Rashtriya Arogya Nidhi scheme. India has also become a member for International Agency for Research in Cancer at its 48th session in France. Government has taken a major step to establish oncology wings in government medical colleges and hospitals to fill up the geographical gaps in the availability of cancer treatment services in the country. The grant is of a one-time grant of 2 crores per institution. Central assistance is provided for purchase of equipment, and civil works and manpower are to be provided by the local institution. Government has also initiated OncoNet in India, which is a telemedicine service for cancer, which includes a vast range of services, consultations, referral, pathology services, all to assist in early detection, treatment and follow-up. Already 25 regional cancer centers have been linked with each other. Each regional cancer center is to be further linked with 4 peripheral centers. A budget of nearly 13 crores has been allocated for this. It is not enough for governments to prevent and treat cancer. They must also empower the cancer patient. Why? Persons with cancer are likely to encounter a loss of personal control of their lives because of the illness. So they must be empowered. When you empower them, you emphasize the possibility of patients owning his or her own life. And this is important because it helps us understand interpersonal and social dynamics of cancer and also guides the development of strategies. Multiple factors influence an individual's sense of control over his or her own life. In our country, particularly social and economic, but many barriers also exist at all levels to empowerment, particularly of cancer patients. Optimal empowerment can occur when strategies are employed at different levels of social organizations. The strategies which need to be recommended and implemented in order to enhance patient empowerment in cancer care will include provision of the best care, GCP, that is good clinical practice, enhancement of individual patient power in decision making, developments of a responsible consumer voice, little change in the attitude of society, and of course rehabilitation of cancer survivors. This can be done by greater interaction between all 3 arms of government, namely the legislature, the executive and the judiciary, non-governmental organizations and charity organizations, and of course public-private partnerships. So I have spoken about government, I have spoken about politics. Let me discuss 2 slides about NGOs and public-private partners. There is an Indian Society for Study of Lung Cancer in India, which is a professional body dedicated to the advancement, research, education and advocacy in lung cancer. It is headquartered at Chandigarh. The objectives are to promote research, education, cooperation and understanding amongst all people related in the field of lung cancer, to work towards its eradication and control, to impress upon government and public for proper implementation of preventive measures, especially tobacco control, to have national, international and international collaboration on study, research and exchange of knowledge about lung cancer and related areas, to promote best possible care for cancer patients, including social, psychological and financial assistance, and to promote participation at community level for prevention of lung cancer. We also have some NGOs, charity organizations working in the field of tobacco. The grave health risks associated with tobacco consumption need to be disseminated on a war footing. Out of these, smoking cessation is the most cost-effective of all medical interventions. Professor Dr. Katiyar is also in charge of a an awareness program which will be conducted on the 11th and 12th of this month. In India, tobacco cessation programs should not only address smoking, they should also address consumption of smokeless forms of tobacco like gutka. Society for Tobacco Control, with its headquarters at VP Chess Institute, Delhi University, has been formed in 2010 with the aims of helping people to stop and quit smoking, preventing people from beginning to smoke, and even protecting non-smokers from the effects of tobacco smoke. A call center and national helpline with 20 counselors whose salary is paid by the government is there for quit smoking services, and the institute provides the area and services. It has helped till date more than 15,000 young people quit smoking. Another example, we are talking of Make in India. Recently, in 29 September, hardly 10 days ago, Tata Memorial Center established the findings of a study in which the detection of EGFR mutation responsible for almost 25% cancers in India and 50% of cancers in Southeast Asia, the cost for detecting that mutation becomes far less, almost 25% of its cost, from 800 to 1100 rupees. The cost has been significantly reduced. We always say, let us compare ourselves with China. So what has China done? I'll just put one example. China is building a forest city in 2020, which will be in the city of Luizhou, which is there in South China. And you can see that every flat, every building, every apartment will look almost like a mini jungle. This is expected to have over 1 million trees and over 40,000 different types of plants. See how it is built here. This is believed to be completed by 2020, and you see the presence of so many trees itself reduces a lot of toxins in the environment, particularly air pollution and other things. It is not enough to have governance by political leaders, government by bureaucrats or NGOs. There is also something called data governance, particularly important in cancer. A robust data governance policy is essential to ensure strategic alignment of data assets to the cancer program, compliance with relevant legislation, standards, policies, confidence in the data used to inform decisions, and effective assurance and control of data management processes, a formalized role and responsibility for everyone involved, and data protection also through documenting policies and procedures, and ongoing communication, education, and monitoring. My last few slides. There's something called politics of business in cancer, which a lot of health activists are raising this issue. They said that in earlier times it was easier to control 1 million people than physically to kill 1 million people. Today it is infinitely easier to destroy 1 million people than to control them. They say that the cancer epidemic is a soft kill operation moved by the world's elite to cull the human population. They claim that globalists first cause the cancer and then provide us with their ineffective treatments, not cures, for profit. This method is called the problem, reaction, solution. Let's see how, is this possible? Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't know. Let's look over it. There are definitely conflicts of interest. In the United States, since passing of the National Cancer Act by President Nixon in 1971, US government has spent almost $105 billion to combat cancer. The NCI itself has a budget of $6.4 billion in 2010. One of the foundations leading the fight against breast cancer at $4.4 billion in public support and cancer. If the base is not there, these people will not benefit. Let's go to pharma. Pharmaceutical giant Merck alone had a research and development budget of $8 billion in 2010 for cancer. Pharmaceutical giant Bayer, known for its billion-dollar industry of chemicals and pesticides, many of which have been linked to cancer in humans. Most of us have used Baygon and some of us are still using Baygon. Bayer is also known indirectly to hold patients on 16 of the commercially available anti-cancer drugs. This is definitely a conflict of interest. Questions that follow: why all the death and the suffering despite billions if not trillions in government and private cancer research? Why have basic cancer treatment modalities remained almost unchanged? True, the advances have been there, but the modalities are still the same. You still have chemotherapy, you still have radiotherapy, and you still have surgery. The answer is that treating cancer appears to be profitable, curing it is not. Is this fact? Is this fiction? Is this economics? Is this business? Or is it just plain politics? Global elite may be spiking our food, air, water, bodies with several toxins to give us cancer and then profiting immensely by selling anti-cancer drugs through the pharma companies they control. Usually these drugs only provide temporary relief in the form of remission. They are being falsely marketed as cures by unauthentic studies and sometimes even manipulated statistics. Science and politics is a fragile live-in relationship. Government provides funds, science provides knowledge, technology and medicine. The social contract between the two, though it is there, is still fragile. Separation of science and politics is never complete. The scientific community is capable of self-regulating itself. If this is allowed without interference from government and society, definitely it will produce benefits. But although this social contract for science continues to dominate popular views, it has been challenged to a grave extent by the politicization of scientific research, particularly in cancer. Challenges: the society today has a far more ambivalent and suspicious attitude towards medical sciences and awareness. There's a complexity of interactions between goal-driven projects and basic research. There's a clash of bureaucratic and political goals along with scientific goals. There's definitely a rise in patient advocacy and medical negligence cases filed in consumer courts, particularly in India. There's increasing concern regarding experimental trials on human subjects and the access of scientists to data without consent. As Sir said correctly, right to privacy, it is important. We need to introspect. We are entering a new era of cancer care. Several new challenges lie ahead which have to be aggressively faced and tackled. Government efforts such as the establishment of several institutions, NCI, the NCDIR, the programs, NPCCDS, these would definitely strengthen people and society in the war against cancer in the new millennium. But the onus also lies on each and every one of us